Welcome back to Federal News Network's Power of Technology series with today's guest, Ingram Micro's Tony Celesti and Microsoft Federal's Dylan Evers. Let's get back to it. Let's talk about another critical aspect of endpoint computing. Now, we haven't really touched on too much because we talked a lot about the security issues, kind of where that's evolved, but that's collaboration. You know, we kind of hinted at it when we talked about people being everywhere, but how has that really changed and evolved, and what do people need now to have collaboration, whether it's in the office, out of the office, or both?
Yeah, I think the pandemic accelerated the government's use of collaboration tools. I mean, almost overnight, they were required to move a sizable chunk of their workforce to remote and to still enable a level of collaboration that allowed them to meet their mission needs. Microsoft was an incredible partner in their ability to go do that with the use of Teams and, our 365 platform. And I think you'll see us continue to do that, right? And the adoption of that has been great in the government post-pandemic as well. And then from a hardware perspective, we're wanting to light those experiences with incredible hardware that not only supports the collaboration, but increases user experience and productivity. And so you'll see that in our Surface Hub portfolio, which are just large screen digital collaboration devices with 4K cameras and mics and touch interface. And then we want to carry that collaboration platform forward in mobile products. So the use of LTE Advanced and 5G, and I think, as you guys know, 5G is the hot topic right now, right? So it's that anytime connectivity that commercial customers demand, that our government customers are going to absolutely require at some point here in the near future. And so we'll just continue to try to create that collaborative platform, not only from a communication standpoint, but from a hardware standpoint. Always, like we mentioned earlier, with user experience being at the forefront and productivity being just an absolute demand.
What are some of the unique challenges, though, to touch back to security, on that authentication factor in those collaboration scenarios?
Yeah, that is the big question, right? Is how are they going to go solve for that? I think one interesting example that's popped up recently is the Army's use of BYOD that they're going to be piloting in a 20,000 user pilot, I believe, for mobility products, where they're going to allow for that kind of similar derived credentials authentication experience that they've enabled across the DoD today, but on a BYOD scenario, which is new to them. And they're going to start, I believe, with the National Guard. So it'll be interesting to see how that pilot tracks and what that does to kind of revolutionize authentication at like the far endpoint, like a mobile product. And maybe what that does to allow for things like derived credential, virtual smart card usage on more traditional PC products, or whether or not, as I think I would hope to see, that they start to adopt more biometric-based authentication for two-factor authentication. So the use of like a Windows Hello camera for facial recognition, or a fingerprint reader, as I believe they're almost 2x more secure than some of the traditional platforms.
Also less friction, right?
Yes.
I think broadly the government has always been interested in collaborating. Now there are certain aspects and areas where that for security or national security, that collaboration has been limited. But when we look at devices and what has occurred today, and this is where policy will have to be affected. And a pilot to do a BYOD will ultimately have to eventually evolve into a policy change to allow for government work to take place on potentially a privately owned device. The other big challenge is where people are accessing their information. So now they can be anywhere. Before, if they were accessing the information in what is their office, a relatively controlled environment, to today it could be your local coffee establishment, it could be who knows where, and it may not just be in their homes. And there may be information at the data level that the government is comfortable from a security standpoint having accessed in a certain location, and other data that may not be able to. So there's going to be a need for geolocation tagging. There's going to be a need for not only policy changes, but more changes in the data management structure, as well as how we authenticate the users and the actual purpose for their what they're trying to accomplish relative to the agency's mission.
Right. All the data may not be available at the edge.
Exactly.
Well, we have a couple minutes left, but before we go, I would kind of like to hear what each of you guys think is the big thing on the horizon for endpoint computing in the government. Just from your separate perspectives, kind of where you see that going. We've talked about a lot of different things today, but maybe there's something really amazing that you want to talk about before we leave. Who wants to jump in?
Well, I'll just say I think we're going to continue to see as we digitize as not just within government but as a nation, the demand for end user devices to only increase, and we saw that with IoT. It's going to continue. Today we all carry around some type of mobile device with us, but we may have multiple between our watches or our fitness bands, things that we're now putting in our ears, glasses we may be wearing in the future that present certain information to us. There's a whole host of things, and I think we're going to continue to only see the demand for those things evolve, and the importance and the significance of the customer experience in these. And we talked earlier about the maintaining being simple, because if you want to secure something, you lock it down to where people can't use it, then they're going to try to find workarounds, and that hinders security. At Ingram, we just launched our Xvantage platform, and that entire platform is to change the online experience in how our partners interface and work with us. So we're going to deliver a world-class collaborative experience that changes the role distribution plays, and I think we're going to continue to see that same type of evolution on the end user device.
Dylan, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Tony's got it absolutely right. I think the adoption of end user technology, or the expansion of adoption, is going to increase, right? I think the government got hooked on collaboration during the pandemic, and I think the speed with which they were able to adopt that collaborative technology well beyond the bounds of what policy had originally allowed them to do, just changed the way that they look at, one, their ability to use it and how it increases productivity, but two, their ability to adopt it, right? They've always been slow to adopt new technologies, and I think they're realizing that they've got an increased agility that they didn't have before. And so that'll lead to things, as Tony mentioned, right? That expansion of end user computing to things like smartwatches, but those wearable glasses, as he mentioned, right? And I think you're seeing this just if you look across industry at where collaboration may be going, right? It's into the metaverse, right? So it's augmented and virtual reality. I think the government's going to be an early adopter of that, certainly commercial will. And that's going to change the way they communicate, not just from like a standard collaboration perspective, but just from an increased capabilities perspective. So things like leveraging Microsoft's Dynamics 365 platform for the use of remote assist and guides, two technologies that enable that remote collaboration, leveraging a augmented reality platform like a HoloLens to do that remote assist capability, right? Where you can have an end user out in the field on the front line, requiring support from a specialist from a remote location, and have that specialist kind of get into that platform using that HoloLens to do that holographic support, and to see in real time what that kind of edge user is doing, and make sure that they've got the capabilities at the edge that they need. The other thing that's going to be interesting with this new kind of mixed reality end user compute scenario is enabling critical mission workloads. So where maybe traditionally someone like a FEMA would show up to a disaster scenario and have to do kind of legacy mapping of a disaster area, sending out people to do site surveys, et cetera. There's going to be a world here soon for the government where they'll be able to deploy drone technology to do near real-time mapping of disaster scenarios, and then bring that map data into a holographic image, able to be manipulated on a frontline tactical operations center, to be able to deploy assets where they need to be deployed in a matter of minutes versus a matter of days. And so it's this new mixed reality world that Windows will enable, and hardware platforms like HoloLens will enable, that I think is the future of end-user computing. I think the government and commercial customers are going to get there sooner than anyone else. Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting, really, to think about that future because the potential in government is honestly huge.
Yes.
You can think of lots of great examples where that type of technology could be used. But we have to end there for now. So I want to thank both our guests today. I'm Vanessa Roberts, and I've been talking with Tony Celesti, Executive Director and General Manager for Ingram Micro Public Sector, and Dylan Evers, Senior Director for the Devices Federal Solutions Group at Microsoft Federal. To learn more about the power of technology, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Ingram Micro. Have a great afternoon.